The first scream echoed across the Deathworld less than 5 minutes after the drop pods opened, and that was when Elias Moreno decided the universe was starving. The sky above was the wrong color, an angry bruised purple streaked with toxic clouds, and the ground crawled with things that either bit, spat acid, or pulsed ominously like they were thinking about exploding. 100 species stood scattered across the impact plane, blinking multifaceted eyes, unfurling antennae, flaring heat veins, and trying not to panic as survival instincts collided with the horrifying realization that the Galactic Conclave had just abandoned them here to observe adaptive behavior under maximum stress. Elias brushed red dust off his jacket, adjusted the cracked badge on his chest that still read Civilian Contractor, Nutrition Services, and sighed. "Yep," he muttered. "Definitely starving." The Deathworld was catalogued as KX-117, classified triple red, lethal flora, hyperpredatory megafauna, unstable tectonics, and atmospheric microbes that could liquefy soft tissue in 6 hours. The Conclave's experiment was simple in theory and obscene in practice. Drop 100 sapient species with minimal supplies and watch which ones survived. No weapons. No ships. No outside contact. Pure evolution through suffering. The other 99 species reacted exactly as predicted. Some scattered immediately, forming defensive circles or digging into the earth with clawed limbs. Others screamed in frequencies that made nearby plants curl inward. One crystalline quadruped collapsed into fragments, overwhelmed by gravity. A pair of avian bipeds took flight and were immediately swatted out of the sky by a floating predator that resembled a jellyfish made of knives. Elias took out a notebook. "Okay," he said aloud, voice calm enough to sound insane. "High-protein environment. Aggressive ecosystem. Everyone's terrified. That's good. Fear burns calories." A 6-limbed reptilian alien staggered toward him, frill flared, eyes wild. "H-human," it hissed through a translator node. "This world will kill us all. We must form a hunt pack or fortress immediately." Elias looked at the creature, Trell, if he remembered the briefing, then at the chaos unfolding around them. A mammalian species was attempting diplomacy with a carnivorous vine. Something was on fire. Screaming continued in at least 7 octaves. "Or," Elias said thoughtfully, "we could start with lunch." Trell stared. "You joke?" Elias smiled, the kind of smile that once unnerved an entire room of food safety inspectors. "I cook." He knelt, ignoring Trell's horrified gasp, and scooped a handful of dirt into a scanner from his pocket. The device beeped angrily. "Toxic. Carcinogenic. Mildly radioactive." Elias nodded. "So no root vegetables," he murmured. "Good to know." Above them, the observation satellites hummed, invisible but omnipresent, recording everything. The Conclave expected bloodshed, tribal warfare, maybe 1 or 2 species adapting through brute dominance. Humans were rated mid-tier survival at best. Cooperative, yes. Durable, sure. But unarmed and outnumbered, they weren't expected to last long. Elias unpacked his drop crate. It contained a foldable cooking surface, 3 heat coils, spice packets, a water recycler, and a knife that had been blunt even before atmospheric entry bent it slightly. Around him, aliens were counting ration bars, clutching heirloom tools, or sobbing over broken technology. "Are you insane?" chirped a small insectid perched on a rock. "We must hide." "The predators." A shadow passed overhead. Something massive roared in the distance, shaking the ground hard enough to knock several beings off balance. Elias steadied the cooking surface with one hand. "Predators get hungry too," he said. The first creature died by accident. A slug-like thing the size of a dog slithered too close to Elias's setup, attracted by the heat coils. It spat corrosive mucus at the metal plate, shrieked when the surface sizzled, and promptly cooked itself into a curling heap of steaming flesh. Silence fell. Dozens of eyes turned toward the smoking carcass. Elias leaned in, poked it with his knife, and sniffed. "Huh! Smells like garlic shrimp." Trell backed away slowly. You cannot be serious. Elias scraped off the charred outer layer, scanned the meat, and frowned. Toxins present, but neutralized by heat. Protein chain stable. Texture. He sliced a piece, chewed thoughtfully, then nodded. Needs salt. He sprinkled seasoning. The sound that followed was not another scream, but a collective, involuntary rumble, stomachs across 100 species reacting to the scent of cooked food in a world that offered only terror. Even predators paused, nostrils flaring. A feline-like alien with saber fangs approached cautiously. Human, it growled. That is meat. Sure is, Elias said. First batch is experimental. Free sample if you sign the liability waiver. What is free? The alien asked. Elias gestured at the corpse-strewn horizon. Promotional pricing. The feline took a bite. Its eyes widened. It is, it said slowly, reverently, acceptable. That was all it took. Within minutes, a loose, bewildered line formed. Some species refused, clinging to cultural taboos. Others argued about digestion compatibility. Elias improvised, adjusting cook times, skimming toxins, inventing sauces out of crushed leaves and purified sludge. He listened, observed, adapted. By nightfall there was light. Not fires, those attracted worse things, but a warm glow around Elias's setup, where beings gathered not to plan violence, but to eat. Conversations replaced screams. Guards rotated instinctively. Someone brought him a spiny carcass as an offering. The Conclave satellites zoomed in. This is irregular, one observer noted. Elias wiped his hands on his jacket, looked at the assembled survivors, and raised his voice. Okay, folks. Tomorrow we figure out shelter. After that, supply chains. But tonight? Tonight we don't die hungry. Trell stared at him, all creeping into its terror. You are not a warrior. Nope, Elias said. I run a restaurant. Somewhere in the darkness, something massive roared again, but this time, it hesitated, drawn not by fear, but by the smell of dinner. Morning arrived with teeth. Something large and many-jointed tested the perimeter at dawn, snapping at shadows and retreating when a dozen very different species stood together instead of running apart, and that was when everyone realized survival on a death world suddenly smelled like roasted spice and shared responsibility. Elias woke to arguments. Not screaming ones, those had mostly burned out overnight, but tight, frightened debates in half a dozen languages. Who guarded whom? Who ate what? Whether the human was manipulating them. Whether cooking meat attracted predators. Whether predators could be negotiated with. Elias listened from his bedroll, eyes closed, letting the noise settle into patterns. Food was already changing them. What happens when he runs out? Guessed the silicon base being whose facets glittered anxiously. The human cannot conjure nutrition forever. Elias sat up. Correct, he said. That's why today we scale. That got everyone's attention. He stood, stretched, and pointed toward the distant jungle where bioluminescent growths pulse like slow heartbeats. This planet wants to eat us. That means it grows fast, reproduces aggressively, and wastes nothing. That's a buffet. We just need to stop thinking like prey. A tall herbivorous species stamped the ground nervously. Your cooking draws killers. So does panic, Elias replied. Difference is, panic doesn't come with calories. They moved anyway, because hunger is persuasive. Sectioned into mixed species teams, they followed Elias into the margins of the jungle. He carried no weapon, only his scanner and knife, humming as if this were a market stroll instead of a death march. When a vine snapped at them, he marked it with a stone. When spores burst into the air, he waved everyone back and waited for the cloud to settle before harvesting the swollen sacks left behind. Poison, Trell warned. Raw, Elias corrected. They learned quickly. Heat neutralized spores. Fermentation softened toxins. One species' caustic saliva broke down shells another couldn't crack. Waste from one digestion cycle became seasoning for another. What had been 100 isolated biologies slowly stitched into a crude ecosystem of their own. Not everyone approved. A heavily armored arthropoid confronted Elias near midday, mandibles clacking. Your system breeds dependence. When predators attack, food will not save us. Elias didn't argue. He handed the creature a skewer. Eat first. The arthropoid hesitated, then consumed the offering. Its posture eased, aggression dimming just enough for thought to sneak in. No, Elias said quietly. Tell me what your people do when threatened. We fortify. We endure. Great, Elias smiled. Build me walls. I'll feed the builders. By afternoon, the camp had shape. Shelters woven from fibrous plants. Heap pits dug with claw and tool. Rotating watches manned by species whose senses complemented one another. Predators circled, curious, confused by the lack of chaos. Then the first real complication arrived, screaming out of the sky. A winged apex hunter dove straight into camp, scales deflecting thrown debris, talons scattering bodies. Panic flared. Elias shoved a pot off the fire, splashing boiling broth across the creature's face. It shrieked, blinded long enough for the armored arthropoid to ram it into a wall, while a gas-breathing species exhaled a stunning cloud. The hunter fled. Silence followed, broken by ragged breathing. That, someone whispered, was almost death. Elias nodded. And tomorrow it'll bring friends. Fear returned, sharper now. That night, Elias changed the menu. He cooked louder, smokier, richer. He dragged the scents outward, away from camp, setting bait fires far from sleeping shelters. Predators followed the promise of easy meat and found traps instead, pits, collapsing branches, coordinated strikes. Not clean. Not elegant. Effective. Losses happened. A small avian species vanished during second watch. A fungal being dissolved when rain mixed wrong with its skin. Elias cooked anyway, hands shaking only once. By the third day, the conclave observers were arguing. They are not fragmenting, one analyst said. They are centralizing around the human. He provides an artificial advantage. No, another replied slowly. He provides logistics. Elias felt the pressure building even if he couldn't see the satellites. Food lines grew longer. Expectations heavier. When supplies ran low one evening, voices rose. Accusations flew. A fight nearly broke out over portions. Elias slammed his knife into the table. If you want more, he said, voice carrying, bring me ingredients. Bring me ideas. Bring me work. I don't run a miracle. I run a kitchen. They stared at him, then at each other. Slowly, deliberately, they dispersed. When Elias lay down that night, exhausted and filthy, Trell sat beside him. You are doing something dangerous, the reptilian said. Elias closed his eyes, listening to the distant roars circling bait fires instead of camp. Yeah, he murmured. But so is starving. Somewhere beyond the jungle, something ancient and massive lifted its head, drawn not by fear anymore, but by organization, and hunger of a different kind. The ground began to vibrate before anyone heard the roar, a deep rhythmic tremor that turned cups into rattles and made even the bravest sentries glance at the jungle with naked dread. Elias felt it through the soles of his boots and knew, with the cold certainty of a cook-smelling gas, that this was not just another predator following bait. This was the landlord. It's coming, someone whispered. The jungle parted as if pushed aside by a moving hill. Trees snapped. Bioluminescent growths burst under enormous weight. What emerged into the clearing was vast enough to blot out the sky, a quadruped titan plated in bone and chitin, eyes burning amber, mouth lined with rotating rows of serrated teeth that dripped something corrosive onto the soil. Several species broke. Not ran, collapsed. Cultural memory screamed extinction. This was the kind of creature that ended evolutionary branches, not individuals. The camp's walls looked like toys before it. The sentries froze. Elias exhaled slowly. All right, he said, voice steady but quiet. That's bigger than the stew pot. Trell stared at him in disbelief. That is a world devourer. You cannot cook that. Didn't say I would, Elias replied. I said I'd feed it. The Titan roared again, a sound that felt like pressure inside the skull. Lesser predators fled. The bait fires were ignored. This thing did not scavenge. It claimed. The camp erupted in chaos. Orders overlapped. Species argued in panic. Some demanded retreat. Others demanded a last stand. The arthropoid builders locked their armor plates, ready to die where they stood. Elias climbed onto the central table. Listen! He shouted. The roar drowned him out. He grabbed a metal bowl, struck it with his knife, again and again, sharp ringing cutting through the panic just long enough. Listen! They did. That thing doesn't care about fear, Elias said. It doesn't care about walls. It doesn't even care about us. We are too small. The Titan lowered its head, inhaling. The smell of food, of days of cooking, waste, scraps, grease, hung over the camp like a beacon. It cares about territory, Elias continued. And competition. The beast took another step forward. The ground cracked. Trell hissed. Human, you are out of time. Elias smiled thinly. Then let's be memorable. He jumped down and started shouting instructions, not to soldiers, but to cooks, builders, scavengers. To species who had learned each other's strengths over shared meals. Gas breathers, I need clouds, thick and low. Acids, prep your strongest, dilute it, don't melt the ground. Burrowers, undermine the left flank, now. No single species could have followed that chaos. Together they did. The camp exploded into motion. As the Titan lunged, the ground beneath its foreleg gave way, not enough to trap it, but enough to stagger. Acid sprayed across its armored chest, sizzling, drawing an enraged bellow. Gas clouds billowed, stinging its eyes, confusing its senses. It lashed out blindly. A dozen beings died in seconds. Elias didn't look. He ran to the cooking pits. The Titan's roar became furious, pained, but not retreating. This was not a creature that fled. This was a creature that dominated until nothing challenged it. Elias! Trell screamed. It's not working! Wasn't meant to! Elias muttered, dumping every remaining scrap of food, fat, bone, and seasoning into the largest pot. He cranked the heat coils to maximum. The mixture boiled, thick and foul-smelling, then, slowly, something else crept into the scent profile. Sweetness. Umami. The Titan paused. Its massive head swung toward the pot. Elias grinned like a madman. Yeah, he whispered. That's curiosity. He dragged the pot, burning his hands, skin blistering, toward the edge of camp, away from shelters, away from the wounded. The Titan followed, nostrils flaring, hunger overriding rage. Observers in orbit went silent. This is irrational, one whispered. No, another replied, stunned. It's behavioral manipulation. The Titan lunged again. Elias stumbled, barely keeping ahead. At the far edge of the clearing, the ground dropped into a natural ravine, a kill pit they'd considered for smaller prey and dismissed as useless against something this large. Elias stopped. The Titan loomed over him, shadow swallowing the light. For one terrible second, everyone thought the human had finally miscalculated. Elias lifted the pot and hurled its contents into the ravine. The Titan reacted instantly, diving after the scent. The ground gave way. The ravine wasn't deep enough to kill it, but it was narrow, unstable, and lined with mineral formations that reacted violently with acid. The Titan fell, roared, thrashed. The combined species didn't hesitate. They attacked, not with weapons, but with coordination. Acid. Gas. Weight. Noise. Relentless harassment. Not to kill. To convince. Hours passed. By the time the Titan finally hauled itself free, its armor scarred, senses overwhelmed, territory contested by 100 stubborn, organized nuisances, it did something no one had ever recorded a creature like it doing. It backed away. Not fleeing. Yielding. The jungle swallowed it again. Silence fell like a held breath finally released. Elias collapsed to his knees. Around him, survivors stared, not cheering, not crying, simply stunned by the impossible truth settling into their bones. They were still alive. Not because they were strongest. Because they worked together around a human who refused to let them starve. Trell approached Elias slowly. "You faced the god of this world," it said. "With soup." Elias laughed weakly, hands shaking. "Stew," he corrected. "Soup's thinner." Above them, the Conclave's feeds lit up with emergency flags. This was no longer an experiment. This was a problem. The Conclave cut the feed 3 days after the Titan retreated, and everyone on the ground felt it, not as silence, but as freedom. The satellites were still there, Elias knew that much. Physics didn't bend for embarrassment. But the constant hum of judgment, the invisible weight of being watched like lab specimens, was gone. Whatever arguments were happening in orbit, they had reached a conclusion. Interference now would look worse than failure. On the Deathworld, life continued. The camp no longer looked like a camp. It had streets. They were uneven and improvised, marked by stones and bioluminescent moss instead of signs, but beings moved along them with purpose instead of fear. Shelters became permanent structures, reinforced with layered materials no single species could have processed alone. Watchtowers rose, not for war, but for weather and migration tracking. And at the center sat Elias's restaurant. It didn't have walls, not really. Just a wide canopy grown from living fibers, heat pits arranged like a constellation, and long communal tables polished smooth by 100 different kinds of hands. The sign above it was carved in 6 scripts and 3-cent markers, roughly translating to "Food here. Don't panic." Elias stood behind the largest pit, stirring something that smelled faintly like smoke, citrus, and triumph. He looked terrible. Burn scars wrapped his hands. His jacket was patched with alien fabrics. He walked with a limp that hadn't been there before the Titan. But his eyes were bright, and his movements had the calm efficiency of someone exactly where they belong. "Human," called the arthropoid builder, setting down a crate of harvested fungus. "The east wall is complete." "Great," Elias said. "You eating today?" The mandibles clicked in what had become a familiar approximation of a smile. "If there is room." "There's always room," Elias replied. That was the lesson, really. Not strength. Not dominance. Capacity. Predators still existed. Storms still tore through the plains. The Deathworld did not soften. But the people on it had changed. They didn't scatter at danger anymore. They checked supplies. They checked on each other. They asked Elias what would cook well with whatever new nightmare the planet threw at them. Somewhere along the way, the word restaurant stopped meaning business and started meaning anchor. When the Conclave finally made contact again, it wasn't with soldiers. It was with lawyers. A projection flickered to life near the edge of camp, resolving into a cluster of impeccably robed representatives. Their expressions were carefully neutral, which on most species meant panic with paperwork. "Survivors of KX-117," the lead speaker intoned. "The experiment has concluded." A ripple went through the camp. Elias didn't stop stirring. "You have exceeded projected survival parameters," the speaker continued. "Recovery vessels are en route. You will be evacuated, debriefed, and—" "No," said a dozen voices at once. The Conclave delegation froze. Elias finally looked up. "Appreciate the offer," he said politely. "But we're not done eating. This world is classified lethal," the speaker insisted. "You cannot remain." Trell stepped forward, frill relaxed instead of flared. "We are no longer subjects," the reptilian said. "We are residents." Murmurs of agreement spread. The Conclave tried logic. Then threats. Then incentives. None worked. The beings of the camp had tasted cooperation. They had buried their dead together. They had learned that survival didn't have to mean isolation. Elias wiped his hands and walked up to the projection. "You dropped us here to see what would happen under pressure," he said. "Well, here's your data. When you starve people, they fight. When you feed them, they build. Silence. What do you want? The Conclave finally asked. Elias thought for a moment. Trade, he said. Recognition. And a permit. A permit, the speaker repeated weakly. To operate. Elias smiled, gesturing behind him. The first interspecies restaurant on a death world. The request stunned them more than the Titan footage ever had. Negotiations took weeks. By the time the first official ship landed, not as a rescue, but as a cargo vessel, the camp had a name. So did the restaurant. Travelers came, cautiously at first, then eagerly. Scientists. Traders. Even predators learned the boundaries, drawn by smells but deterred by reputation. The death world didn't stop being deadly. It just stopped being lonely. One evening, long after the Conclave ships had settled into regular routes, Elias closed the pits and sat at a table with Trell, watching the lights flicker on as night creatures woke. You could have left, Trell said. After the Titan. After they offered. Elias shrugged. Every cook dreams of a place where everyone's hungry. Trell considered that, then looked around at the mixed crowd laughing, eating, arguing over flavors instead of survival. You changed the outcome of an experiment. Elias smiled, tired and satisfied. Nah. Just adjusted the menu. Above them, the death world roared, stormed, and threatened as it always had. And at its heart, a restaurant stayed open, serving proof that even in the worst place in the universe, humanity's most dangerous weapon wasn't force. It was dinner.